Well, let's talk about the LGBTQIA plus community and how there's this fear going on in society right now, especially amongst the left-leaning people, that the beginning of a new Trump presidency will result in the foundational loss of human rights for people who identify as gay or are part of one of those sexually alternative groups. Now, there is an opposition on the right to things like abortion, to things like trans people participating in women's sports, to things like drag queens having events at bookstores where they're reading children's stories to children while they are dressed up as drag queens. And I bring all of this up to point out one very obvious fact, that all of the times when the people on the right say we do not support LGBT people doing certain things, or we don't support women doing certain things, whether you agree or not, all of those positions are built around advocacy and are rooted in a desire to protect the vulnerable. It's okay if you want to be a drag queen. That does not mean that it's appropriate for you to dress yourself up in a pseudo-promiscuous way as a drag queen so that you can go surround yourself with children and read children's books to them. It's okay if, as a woman, you do not want to have children or you want to be competitive in the workplace. But when you decide that you want to end a human life, which may not have the ability to advocate for itself, that's where you get into a, at minimum, gray area where there's room to have discussion about the topic. But to say that people who don't support abortion don't support women's rights is an oversimplification, because it's not just about women's rights. It's about the debate of the sanctity of human life. If a person wants to be a trans person and be competitive, that's fine. It's not the same as saying we don't want them in the workplace to say we don't want them in women's sports, because the fact is that a person who is or was a man is not the same as a biological woman. Now, I understand that all of these could be things that we debate. They could be things where we all have different positions on where the line should be drawn. But all of these things are about advocacy. All of these things are about protecting some group which potentially could be compromised, whether it's an unborn child or women in sports or children who are below the age of consent. As for individual people, grown adult people who are in the company of other consenting adults, the truth is that the vast majority of America believes in those people's foundational, absolute right to freedom of expression, to freedom of identity, a right to exist, to be safe, and to have their own communities and circles which are supportive of them. That isn't going to change. What will change is having a society where preachiness is viewed as a mandate of the left. I don't want to play video games which feel like they were specifically designed to have whole chapters of preachiness just there to try to remind the players that the developers are woke or pushing some sort of a possibly unpopular agenda to use what's supposed to be a tool of entertainment and neutrality as a rallying cry for their activist positions. But that does not mean that we don't want those people to exist. It doesn't mean we don't want their positions to have a place in society. It's just saying we want to be able to ignore them if we would like to ignore them. We would like to be able to have our own communities which exclude people who are not aligned with our interests. And by that, I do not mean that we want to discriminate against people by saying certain types of people aren't welcome. It's just, you shouldn't go join the hunting club if you're a vegan and you hate hunting. If you do, then there's a natural question of why are you there? Why are you joining a group that you hate, unless you are going there for the purpose of causing trouble? So as we move forward, I think it's important to just draw a clear line here and clarify the fact that there is no agenda to deprive people of their personal rights, rights to assemble, rights to free speech, rights to agree or disagree with something, rights to be weird and unusual. We believe in those things. And I'm sure there are a few people who don't. There are a few people who are truly bigoted, people who have the belief that anyone who does not align with their ethos shouldn't be allowed to exist. And regardless of their political identities, those people we should stand against. If you see someone being bullied because they don't fit in, you should stand up and defend that person, because bullying people is wrong. And yet, a big reason why I oppose the activist left today is because many of their actions, while they have portrayed themselves as being the victims, have been often geared toward bullying people who disagree, bullying anyone who does not align with their activist liberal ethos of woke ideology, because they haven't just wanted a right to exist. They've wanted to be able to force their opinions on other people and shame anyone who doesn't actively like it. That's a line that they have crossed in many cases. The key to having a successfully balanced society is to have a place for everyone. And that isn't necessarily the same space. Because if you're that person who is a vegan opposed to the idea of hunting, then you should have your own club. If you want Chinese food, you probably shouldn't be looking for it at McDonald's. See, it's okay to have silos. It's okay to have different groups of people who come together to rally around things that they think are important, that they think are cool, things that matter to them, which separate them from others who are different. And that does not mean that society is itself discriminatory. Imagine how boring it would be if everything was just mashed together. You go to the buffet, you load up everything at the buffet. Everything has to go on the plate. You can't not put any food on your plate. You have to put some of everything on your plate. And then what's more, you have to mash it together until it is a indistinguishable slop. And then you have to eat it. You have to eat all of it together. You can't separate them. You can't separate the foods and eat one and not another. You can't leave something off the plate because you just don't like that food. You have to create a homogenized, androgynous mess that is indistinguishable, which has no identity of its own other than the fact that it has included everything. Is that the society we want? No, I wouldn't say so. We want a society where the gays and the furries have their own groups. It's just, for those of us who aren't gays or furries, we want the right to not be part of that group. And as for rights, well, we will continue to have those conversations. And I will say that sometimes when you are talking about the right to do things which involve other people, that can be a complicated conversation. Things like abortion are contentious, and they will continue to be contentious. And sometimes you can make a case for both sides. You can see where each position is coming from. And not everyone is going to like the outcome of decisions that are made, because sometimes, as much as we want to live in a world that's purely black and white, certain aspects of life are shades of gray. And my purpose here is not to settle those big, unsettlable questions. It's just to make a very clear point that we aren't, under any circumstance, trying to eliminate the existence of people who are different than us. So if there's someone out there saying, I'm going to go to sleep tonight and then Trump is going to be in office and I'm not going to have the right to even exist as a human being, that's ridiculous. It's just not true. The reality is many of the policies which have been voted for by the American people, which will be implemented in a new administration, are also policies which very well could be quite positive for all people, including minority groups of all kinds. Because these clickbait issues, these things like, should a drag queen be reading stories to children at the bookstore, or should trans people be in sports, or do women need to be getting abortions all the time? These things are not topics which are everyday dinner table conversations for the average person. The average person is just going about their life, trying to buy groceries, trying to keep their job, trying to play a video game that they like, trying to be able to be part of society and live a life that is successful, safe, and happy. The average person is not defined by these things to the degree that the radical left has made it seem. They would make it seem like the average issue to the American people is something related to identity politics. And the truth is, that is a very far outlier. That's not what we get up every day and spend all of our time thinking about. Maybe we sort of started to do that because in the recent times, politics has made that a top of the list issue. It's been something we haven't been able to ignore. It's something that has been pushed in our face by all sorts of media and all sorts of other people who wanted to make it top of mind and make it seem like it was a major issue. The reality is, it really isn't. Even within the special interest group communities like gay communities. I don't know, because I'm not part of their community, but I would venture to say that the average gay person doesn't get up every day and just spend their whole day thinking about how they're gay. I would imagine that the gay people have other things too that maybe interest them, like hobbies or economic interests or other things that give them a sense of identity other than just their sexual orientation. And if that's true, then the left has actually done a disservice to those communities, because it has reduced them to a caricature. It has tried to make it seem like the only thing that matters if you are a gay is that you are gay, and you don't have any other needs or interests or depth to your personality other than that one thing. And that is not really any different than people who would dress themselves up in blackface because they wanted to be a black person for performance purposes. It's disrespectful because it reduces a person to one very small part of what they actually are. So let's let go of that stuff and get back to a normal way of being a common American. Let's just not worry too much about all of those things. Let's change the subject, so to speak. And as we work to bring down the temperature, let's try to create a society where we're just fellow Americans. That's all. And that is enough. As always, thanks so much for watching.